Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Babel on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Tes of Masechta Shabbis. Quick overview of the page before we begin. The Daf starts out discussing moist materials, right? We had said in our Mishnah that there are certain materials such as straw. If they are moist, you would not be allowed to insulate with them, but if they are dry, you would be able to insulate with them. So, what exactly is moist? We will discuss that. We're going to talk a little bit about tefillin, not really about the halachos of tefillin, but a little bit about the halachos, a little bit about some other cool stuff. We are going to talk about insulating food with hides, like animal hides. Sounds cool, right? And we're going to discuss at the end a little bit about the 39 melachos. So that is a sort of quick outline of the page, and let's begin. So we are on Daf Mem Tes Amud Aleph, 4 lines into the page, Bizman Shehin Lachin. So our Mishnah said, as I had said just a minute ago, that when it comes to certain materials such as straw, grape peels, these mochin that we discussed yesterday, these like fibrous materials, grass, things like that, they would have to be moist in order for them to be forbidden to insulate with. But if they are dry, you are permitted to insulate with them. The Gemara asks, they want to know, Lachin machmas atzman oduma lachin machmas davar acher. When it says that these things have to be moist, does that mean that they have to be like themselves moist, right? That you have to use moist grass, that the grass itself is like fresh and moist, even if there's no actual like water on the outside of it, but they're still like kind of fresh? Or does it mean that no, maybe these things need to, if water gets on them, so then they'll be considered moist, but they're not necessarily going to be sort of inherently moist, and therefore they won't provide as significant of a heat when they are hot. Tashma, come in here. Lo b'tevin v'lo b'zagim v'lo b'mochin v'lo b'asavim. So we do not insulate with straw, with grape peels, with these fibers, and with grass, bisman she'ein lachin, as long as they are moist. Now, iyamar b'shlam lachin machmas davar acher shapir. I understand if we say that we're talking about these materials that get moist from something else. I don't know, maybe if a glass of water spills on them. So that makes sense. I can understand how any of these materials, some water gets on it, they're moist. Eli amad lachin machmas atzman. But if you say that they have to like be fresh and moist, well, mochin lachin machmas atzman heichim mishkachasla. How are you going to have a situation where these fibrous materials that are used for making felt are going to be moist from themselves? They're like just fibrous things. They're not going to be moist. They'll only be moist if something spills on it. So the Gemara answers, mimirta de bene atme. Oh, so it's talking about that these fibers come from like wool that are between the legs of the animal, and therefore they're like all sweaty and full of moisture. Okay. V'haditani Rabbi Oshaya tomenim b'chsus yivesha u'v'peris yiveshin. Now which Rabbi Oshaya taught that you are allowed to insulate with dried out clothing or dried out fruits. Avalo b'chsus lacha v'lo b'peris lachin, but not with moist clothing or moist fruits. So ksus lacha machmas atzmei mishkachasla. How would you find clothing that is moist on its own? Why would clothing be moist? So again, mimirta de bene atme. Well, if the clothing is made from this wool from between the legs of the animal, where it's all sweaty, so then you'll have nice, moist, sweaty clothing. Okay. New Mishnah. Tomnin bichsus uviperis. You're allowed to insulate with clothing, with fruits. Bikanfeyona, right? So we said, so Rashi explained that fruits could be things like, legumes or like wheat berries. So I guess you can insulate with that. Bikanfeyona, with feathers of a dove. Uvansoris shel charashim. You can insulate with sawdust of what are those guys called? The guys who do wood stuff. How am I forgetting the name of these guys? Oh, carpenters. Great. Uvan oris shel pishtan, and with these like little bits of flax that come off of the flax when you are processing it. Daka, as long as they are very thin. Rabbi Yehuda oser b'daka. Rabbi Yehuda says actually we're going to discuss what Rabbi Yehuda is going on, but he says that when we'll define what they are, but when they are very thin, then you cannot insulate with them because they will get too hot and they will be mosif hevel. Umatir begasa, but as long as they, which is either the sawdust of the carpenters or this flax stuff that falls off of it during the processing, if they're thicker, so then you would be allowed to insulate with them. Alright friends, let's go weiter in the Gemara. Amr Reb Yanai, so it says Reb Yanai, Tefillin tzrichin guf naki ke'elisha baal Kenafayim. So in order to wear tefillin, you must have a clean body, like this fellow named Elisha baal Kenafayim, who we're going to learn about in a minute. Mahi, what does it mean that your body needs to be clean? So Abaye Amr Shlei Afiach Boen. So Abaye says that you need to make sure that you won't pass gas in your tefillin when you are wearing them. Rava Amar Shlo Yishan Boen. Rava says you have to make sure that you don't sleep in your tefillin. And the concern, says Rashi, of sleeping is that A, you might pass gas, and B, you might see keri, right? Either of those are things that we don't want you to do in your tefillin. So therefore Rava says make sure not to sleep in them. But as long as you're awake, he would say it's fine. Okay, fine. How come we call this fellow Elisha baal Kenafayim? What's the deal? Why are we just calling them Elisha of dove feathers? No, Elisha of feathers. Why are we calling him, or maybe wings? Elisha of wings. Why do we call him Elisha of wings? I don't have any friends that I just call like so-and-so of wings. So why do we call him Elisha of wings? So here we go. That one time the evil Roman Empire, they made a decree. Yikes. That anybody who puts on tefillin, we're going to gorge out his brain. That sounds very unpleasant. Via Elisha manicham, and Elisha would defy this very unsettling decree, and he would nonetheless put it on tefillin, v'yotze l'shuk, and he would go out to the market. Now one time, ra'au kastar echad, and one time a police officer, a Roman police officer, saw Elisha doing this, and he got very upset. Ratz mipanav. So Elisha baal Kenafayim realized, I am in trouble. So he started running away. So v'ratzacharav, and this police officer ran after Elisha baal Kenafayim, or at least at that point, he was probably just called Elisha. V'cheven shegia etzlo, nitalim mirosho v'achzan biyado. And then immediately, and then once the police officer caught up with Elisha, so Elisha took off his tefillin and put them in his hands. Amr lo maza biyadach. And then the police officer said, "Hey, mister, what's in your hands?" Amr lo kanfayona. Oh, nothing, just some dove wings. Pasha desyado v'nimtzu kanfayona. And sure enough, he opened up his hands, and in his hands were not tefillin, rather they were wings of a dove. Wow, what a story! Lefichach koranosa Elisha baal Kenafayim, and that is how he got his name, Elisha baal Kenafayim. That's pretty cool. That must be a name of honor from that point on, right? Every single time anybody mentions you, they mention this miraculous story that happened to you. That's pretty cool. Umashna kanfayona mishar ofis. How come davka wings of a dove? Why not wings of epis a chicken? Why weren't they chicken wings? Buffalo wings. He opened up his hands and it was a plate of buffalo wings. Anyways, how come that didn't happen? So the Gemara answers, Mishum, the Amtil Knesset Yisrael Liyona, because Am Yisrael is compared to or parabled as a dove. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Tehillim, Kanfayona nechba b'kesev v'gomer. The wings of a dove that are covered in silver. Mayona knafea maginos alea, af Yisrael mitzvos maginos alea. And just like the wings of a dove protect it, right? It uses it as protection against anybody that may try to harm it. So also the mitzvahs protect the Jewish people from any adversaries. Very cool. So the Mishnah had said that you may insulate with sawdust of carpenters or with these flax things that fall off during the processing. Now Rabbi Yehuda had said, well, actually if they're really thin, so then you may not insulate with them because they will be mosif hevel. So now, Ibayu, they want to know, Rabbi Yehuda on the sar shel charashin koi or on the oris shel pishton koi. When Rabbi Yehuda says do not use it when it's thin, is that referring to the sawdust of the carpenters, or is that referring to this flax that falls off during the processing? So Tashmad Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that we learn in a brayso that Rabbi Yehuda says, Ne'oris shel pishton daka areu kizevel, that very thin, that this flax that falls off during the processing, that's very thin, it is like manure. And we saw in the first Mishnah that manure is one of those things that are mosif hevel and are not allowed to be used. Shmamina, an oris shel pishton kai shmamina. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda, when he says don't use it when it's thin, it's referring to this flax that falls off during while processing it. Let's go weiter in Shas. New Mishnah. Tomnin bashlachin. You are allowed to insulate with animal hides. Umataltlin osan, and you can move them around. Okay, so I guess after you're done, let's say you already ate whatever food is in there, so you can now move these hides. You are allowed to insulate with wool shearings. However, the wool shearings are muktzah because they're not, you don't usually just use wool shearings, rather you would have them set aside to make them into threads and to weave with and things like that. So therefore they're going to be muktzah on Shabbos even though you're insulating with them. Okay? Keitzaru osa, well, let's say you did in fact insulate your pot with wool shavings, or wool shearings, so your entire pot is covered in this wool. So how are you supposed to get the contents from the pot without moving the wool? So notel asakisoy ve'noflos. What you can do is you can lift up the lid to the pot, and then when you lift up the lid to the pot, whatever wool is on it will just kind of fall off, and that would be acceptable. And Rashi says, in the Rashi the Mamaskal notel kisoy, at the end of the Rashi he says, Tilo naisis basis laen she'en asui el lechasos keder. So he says that it's okay that even though the wool is on this lid, the lid does not become a basis, like a base for this muktzah, because interestingly, the lid is only meant to be a cover for the pot, meaning I guess as opposed to a basket or I don't know, what were other things that we said would be a basis, or let's say this incense censer, things that are meant to put things in it, so then if you have muktzah in them, so then they would become a basis. But over here, you're not meant to be putting any of this wool on it, therefore even though the wool is on top of it, it doesn't become a basis, which is interesting. And therefore you nonetheless be allowed to move this lid, and whatever wool is on top of it will just fall off, and that would be acceptable. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, kupa. What if you have a box or something, and you have the pot in this box and it's surrounded by all sorts of insulating stuff. So mata al tzida v'notel. What you do is, instead of removing the pot, you just pour the contents out of the pot, but leave it in this box. Because we're concerned that if you take the pot out of this box that it's insulated in, well, maybe then when you take it out, the hole that the pot was in will get filled up. Whatever was insulating surrounding it will fall into the place where the pot was, and then you won't be able to put the pot back in. So instead of taking the pot out of the box, just kind of pour from the pot into whatever dish you're going to be serving from, but don't actually remove the pot so you can keep it in there. Chacham say no problem. You can take out the pot, you can put back the pot, and Rashi says the Gemara is going to explain what that means. It sounds like the assumption being even if things fall into the place where the pot was, you'd be able to move them, but I can't say for sure. Let's go weiter in the Gemara. Yosef Rabbi Yonasan ben Achinai, Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, Yosef Rabbi Chanina bar Chama Gabayu. So 3 of these rabbis were sitting together. Rabbi Yonasan ben Achinai, Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, and Rabbi Chanina bar Chama. Okay? And they asked the following question. Shlachin shabal abayis tanan. When we say that you are permitted to insulate with these hides, and you can also move them. is that only hides that belong to a homeowner, to a baal habayis. However, if we're talking about the hides of like a tanner, of a person who actually, processes hides and sells them, well, maybe in that case, you would not be allowed to move them after you're done insulating with them, because he's going to be makpid on them to make sure that they don't get dirty. He's going to have to sell these things, so therefore he's not going to want to sit on them, he's not going to want to move them, and therefore they would be muktzah and you can't move them. Or maybe the Mishnah is even saying that the processed hides of a craftsman, of a tanner, you would be allowed to insulate and move. And then certainly the hides that belong to a baal habayis, you would be allowed to move, since you can sit on them and do things like that. Amlu Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar. So Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar said, well, mistavish baal habayis tanan aval shel uman kapir alayu. So Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar said, look, it makes sense to me to say that that the Mishnah is talking about the hides of a baal habayis. That a baal habayis, he has some hides, maybe to sit on, whatever it is, and he wants to insulate a pot, so he can use it to cover the pot and insulate it. And when he's done insulating the pot, he can then take them and move them, sit on them, whatever he wants. But a craftsman, he's going to be makpid. He's going to be, he's not going to want to just use these hides and sit on them and, whatever might happen to them, because he's going to want to sell them. He's going to want to keep them in tip-top condition. So therefore, it would be muktzah. You would not be allowed to move it if they belong to a tanner. To which Reb Chanina bar Chama interceded, and he said, Kach Omar Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, I assume that's referring to Rabbi Shmuel, the son of the Tana Rabbi Yossi, said the following, Abba Shaloch Ahava, my father Rabbi Yossi was a tanner. Ve'amar, and he would say to us during the week, Haviu shalachin v'neishev alein, bring over some hides so that we could sit on them. The point being that they would, so he's not necessarily saying that that on Shabbos it wouldn't be muktzah. He's not saying that. However, what he is saying is that they would, it was normal for them to just sit on hides, right? His father, who was a craftsman, who was a tanner, he would even say, hey, bring over some hides that I've finished processing so that we could sit on them. So clearly then even craftsmen would sit on these hides, and Rav Chanina bar Chama's argument being that on Shabbos, these hides, even belonging to a craftsman, should not be considered muktzah, and you should be allowed to move them. Meisvei, we have a kasha against Rav Chanina bar Chama. Nisarin shabal habayis, if you have planks of wood that belong to a baal habayis, metaltlin osan, so on Shabbos you can move these planks of wood. Okay? V'shal uman ein metaltlin osan. But if these planks of wood belong to a craftsman, to a carpenter, to somebody who's going to be using planks of wood for his work, well then, you may not move them on Shabbos. However, if he thought that, look, I want to use, if in advance, before Shabbos, he said, look, I want to use these planks of wood because I'm having guests over and I'm going to want to put some bread on these planks, use it as like a table, well then, whether he's a craftsman, whether he's not a baal habayis, you would be allowed to move these planks. So the point being that these planks of wood belong to a craftsman, a wood craftsman, a carpenter, so by default they would be considered muktzah, and you would not be allowed to move them. So we want to say that the same thing should apply to a tanner, that his processed hides that he's going to want to sell should be considered muktzah, and you should not be allowed to use them. So you have to move them. So the Gemara answers, Shiny nisarim dekaped alayu. It's different when it comes to planks of wood, that a carpenter is going to be makbid to make sure that these planks of wood remain clean, and he's not going to want to be using them as a tabletop to put bread and who knows, maybe hot soup, right? Things that might actually stain the wood. So that for sure he's not going to want to do. But apparently the same would not necessarily be true about hides, and a tanner may very well sit on the hides and use them even before they're sold, as evidenced by Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi saying that his father would say, hey, bring over some of these hides so that we could sit on them. Tashma, come in here. Oros, when it comes to hides, ben avudin uven she'en avudin. So whether they are processed, whether they are not processed, mutar l'taltalam b'Shabbos, you would be allowed to move them on Shabbos. Lo amar avudin el linyan tuma bilvad. And the only difference that it makes when it is processed is that once it's processed, it's makabel tuma. If it's not processed, it's not yet makabel tuma. But in terms of moving on Shabbos, no difference. Whether it's processed, not processed, you can move it on Shabbos. My lav, lo shna shel baal bayis, lo shna shel uman. So let's assume that this brisa is saying plainly that you can move these hides, whether they're processed or not, and it doesn't matter whether you're a regular baal bayis or whether you're a craftsman, you would still be allowed to move these hides. And Gemara says, lo, shel baal bayis, aval shel uman mai, ein metaltalin. No, this brisa is only referring to baal bayis. When we say that these hides, whether they are processed or not, you can move, that's for a baal bayis. But an uman, a craftsman, would not be allowed to move these hides if they are processed, right? Because then he's going to want to sell them and he's going to be makbid on them. The Gemara says, if that's the case, well, once already the brisa is making distinctions and saying, that the only difference that is made is that when it is processed, it's makabel tuma. Well, then liflog, make a second distinction. And teach by it. When do we say that there's no difference between a unprocessed and a processed hide in terms of moving it? When do we say that? B'shel baal bayis. That's only when we're talking about a baal bayis. Aval b'shel uman, lo. But if it belongs to a craftsman, then there would be a difference, which is that once the hide is processed, the craftsman would not be allowed to move it. Okay? So if we're saying that this brisa is only referring to a baal bayis and saying that a baal bayis is allowed to move this hide, whether it is processed, whether it's not processed, but a craftsman would not, meaning once it's processed, a craftsman would not be allowed to move it because he's going to want to sell it and he's going to be makbid on it. Well, then this brisa should tell us that. Should say that when we say that you're allowed to move it no matter what, whether it's processed or not, that's only by a baal bayis. But a craftsman would only be allowed to move it if it's not processed. But if it is processed, he would not be allowed to move it. So the Gemara says, look, kula b'baal bayis kamairi. This brisa is only talking about baal bayis. It's only talking about a baal bayis. The context of the brisa is only talking about a baal bayis. And therefore it's saying that the baal bayis can move this hide whether it's processed, whether it's not. And the only difference for a baal bayis would be that if it's processed, then it is able to be makabel tuma. However, don't start bringing in umans, don't start bringing in craftsmen. It's just going to complicate things, as I'm sure you've already noticed, that once you bring in the craftsmen and start talking about processed, not processed, muktzah, not muktzah, it gets more complicated. So the Gemara says, look, that brisa is only talking about baal bayis. It's not talking about craftsmen. Leave the craftsman out of it. However, a craftsman, sure enough, would not be allowed to move a processed hide since he's makbid on it. Now the Gemara says, look, kitanoi. At the end of the day, this is a machlokas tanaim. Oro shabal bayis metaltlin osan v'shal uman ein metaltlin osan. We have a brisa in which the Tanakama says that the hides belonging to a baal bayis, you can move them, and if they belong to a craftsman, you may not move them. And I think that this is talking about once they are processed. Rabbi Yossi Omer says, Rabbi Yossi echad zeh v'echad zeh metaltlin osan, that whether they are processed, whether it's a baal bayis, whether it is a craftsman, you can move these hides no matter what. Now, Rabbi Yossi, as we said at the top of the page, was himself a tanner. So I feel like, usually we say yachid v'rab malacha karabim, right? When you have a lot of people, and then you have an individual opinion, we go like the majority. However, I feel like in this case we should go like Rabbi Yossi because he's actually a tanner, right? He's actually somebody who would know, and he's saying, look, and as we saw from the top of the page, he would say, like, let's sit on these hides. So like even craftsmen themselves are not makbid. But I imagine that we still go like the Rabbim, especially after we've studied before on Daf Yud Tes Amud Aleph of Brachos. We referenced the Tanur Shel Achnai, where even a baskol, a voice from heaven came out and said that the halacha was like Rabbi Eliezer, and still we don't pass like Rabbi Eliezer because it does, we go like the majority, and that is that. So I assume that that's the same here. Okay. Now this group of 3 rabbis once again convened, and they were sitting and they asked, so when we say, so this is a Mishnah that we're going to get to on Daf Ayin Gimel, not too long, it's not too far away, but 2.5 weeks from now, we're going to get to a Mishnah that lists the 39 melachos, and it says that there are, in fact, 39 melachos, 40 minus 1, which is 39. So what are they based on? How do we know that there are 39? Why not 38 or 40? So Amalu Reb Chanina Bar Chama. So Reb Chanina Bar Chama said, Kineged avodos ha-mishkan. Well, it's basically based on the work that they did in the Mishkan. And as Rashi points out, right, in Dibra Maschil, Kineged avodos ha-mishkan. So Rashi says at the end there, Ufarshas Shabbos nismechat lefarshas melachos ha-mishkan lilmod imena. And I think it's at the beginning of Parshas, was it the beginning of Parshas, what's at the end of Shmos? Vayakel, maybe, I think. Anyways, so the parsha of the Mishkan of Shabbos is right next to the parsha of building the Mishkan, to say that, well, just like there were 39 melachos when building the Mishkan, so those 39 melachos would be also on Shabbos. Okay. Amlu Rabbi Yonasan Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Yonasan Rabbi Elazar said to them, Kach Omar Reb Shimon Reb Yossi ben Lekunya, that Reb Shimon Reb Yossi ben Lekunya said the following, Kineged melacha melachto u'melechos shebetorah arba'im chaser achas. So he says that the 39 are based on the fact that it says the words melacha or melachto or meleches a total of 39 times in the Torah. And because it says, these melacha based words, these melacha oriented words 39 times in the Torah, so that's how we know that on Shabbos there are 39 melachos, although we wouldn't necessarily know from that what the 39 melachos are. We would still, I guess, have to figure out what they are, meaning if you learn it out from the Mishkan, so I guess it's pretty easy, right? There were 39 melachos when they built the Mishkan, and those same 39 melachos would be also on Shabbos. But if you say that it's just learned out from the fact that it says melacha oriented words 39 times throughout the Torah, well then, great, so we know that there's 39, then we have to start figuring out what those 39 are. Okay, fine. By Rav Yosef. Now Rav Yosef asked a question. It says by the pasuk by Yosef HaTzadik, right, in Parshas Vayeshev, it says Vayavo Abayis Elasos Melachto. This was Melachto. This was with the wife of Potiphar. That whole story when they, she seduced him and that whole thing. So it says Vayavo Abayis Elasos Melachto, that Yosef HaTzadik came home, meaning came to Potiphar's house to do his work. And there's a machlokes in Masechta Sota that about, was Yosef going to Potiphar, was it saying that Yosef was going to the house lasos melachto, to do his daily chores, to do his work, or maybe it means that time he had decided that he's actually going to sleep with Eishes Potiphar. Okay? So Rav Yosef wants to know, does this pasuk count? When it says, right, lasos melachto, does it actually mean milacha? Does that count as one of the 39? Or maybe it's saying lasot melachto, that he was going to sleep with Eishes Potiphar, and therefore it isn't one of the melachas, and it wouldn't be counted. So he wants to know if it's counted as one of the 39 or not. So Amalei Abaye v'leise sefer Torah v'limne. So Abaye says, I don't get it. What's your question? Why don't we just bring a sefer Torah and we'll start counting and we'll see. If including this pasuk there are 39, so clearly it's one of them. If including this pasuk there are 40, then clearly it's not one of them. So Milo Amar Rav Bar Bachana Rabbi Yochanan, and Abaye says, because after all, didn't Rav Bar Bachana say the name of Rabbi Yochanan? And Rashi points out that he doesn't know where Rav Bar Bachana said this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, but apparently he said it somewhere. What did he say? That they didn't move from where they were, in whatever context that was, until they brought a Sefer Torah and counted. So Abaye is suggesting that they do the same over here. He says, Rav Yosef, why don't we go grab a Sefer Torah and we'll start counting, and we'll see how many times it says melacha, melacha, melachto, whatever it was, in the Torah, and we'll see. If there are 40 including this pasuk, then clearly it's not included. If there are 39 including this pasuk, then clearly it's included. Amar le Rav Yosef said to Abaye, no, that's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking. I actually know the answer. Including this, there are 40. What I'm asking is that Kika Masabkali, what I'm not sure about is Mishum Dichsiv, because we have another pasuk that I'm also uncertain about. V'amlacha haisadayim. That it says that by the melachos hamishkan, at a certain point, it says that the work was complete. The work was complete. And Mimanyanahu, so he wants to know, do we include that? When it says melacha over there, is it saying that the work was complete, meaning that all the work that they did was always done perfectly, not more and not less than they needed? In which case, v'amlacha haisadayim is referring to melacha, is referring to actual work, and if therefore that would be included in one of the 39, which would mean that the pasuk by Yosef must be referring to going to sleep with Eshes Potiphar, and it's not malacha, and therefore it's not one of the 39, right? So again, Mishum Dichsev, as it says, Mamlacha Isadayim Miminyonahu, and if we say that that is one of the 39, which would mean that this is based like the Manda Amar by Yosef HaTzadik, that he was going to sleep with Eshes Potiphar, and therefore that one would not be counted. Or Dilma, or maybe or maybe when it says by Yosef HaTzadik that he went home to do his melacha, it means that he was going to do his actual work, his chores, so that would be one of the 39. And when this pasuk of Amlacha Isadayim, it doesn't mean that they were actually doing work and that it was done perfectly. What it means is that they were finished with the contributions to the Mishkan. As Rashi points out, that avidita could also refer to contributions. And therefore, and that's what it's saying. So it's not actually saying that they were doing work, it's just saying that all the contributions for the Mishkan were complete and they didn't need anything else. So that's not one of the 39, and the one by Yosef HaTzadik is one of the 39. That is what Rav Yosef was trying to figure out. Which one's included and which one isn't. The Gemara says, Teku, we don't know. According to the opinion that says that, it says Melacha, Meleches, Melachto 39 times in the Torah, we don't know, if that's including Yosef and excluding V'amlacha Isadayim, or if it's including V'amlacha Isadayim and excluding Yosef. Teku. We'll have to figure out when Eliyahu Hanavi comes. Tanya, Commander Amar, Keneged Avodos HaMishkan. So we have a brisa that supports Rav Chanina Bar Chama, who says that the 39 are based on the 39 melachas that they did when building the Mishkan. Titania, as we learn in a brisa, in Chayavin Ela al Melacha Shekayotze Ba Aisa B'Mishkan, you would only be chayav on Shabbos for performing a melacha that they did in the Mishkan. Heimzaru Vatim Lo Sizro, they planted seeds in the Mishkan to, grow things for dyes. So you should not plant seeds on Shabbos. Heimkatsu Vatim Lo Siktsu, they harvested these plants that they planted for dyes. So do not harvest plants on Shabbos. They would have to, when they moved the Mishkan, when they moved the camp, they would have to pick up the beams from the floor, which is a Rishus HaRabim, and put them into the wagons, which are Rishus HaYachid. Therefore you shouldn't, on Shabbos, be machnis from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid. They lowered down, they took out the beams from the wagons and lowered them to the ground when they had to build the Mishkan. Therefore you should not be motzi from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. They would take something from one wagon to another wagon, i.e. from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid. Therefore you shouldn't take something from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid, my ka'avid. The Gemara says, 1 second. What's the problem with taking something from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid? The only problem is Otzah me Rishus LeRishus. The only problem is from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, or vice versa, from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid. But Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaYachid is no problem. So why are we saying it is? So Abaye v'Rava Damir Tarvayu v'Item Ravada Bar Ahava me Rishus HaYachid Rishus HaYachid derech Rishus HaRabim. It means from Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid by way of Rishus HaRabim. That would be a problem. But directly from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid would be acceptable. Okay, cool. And that was Daf Mem Tes of Masechta Shabbos. Let us recap. So we started off the daf with discussing what would be considered, how do we define these moist materials that you would not be allowed to insulate in, yet if they're dry you would. So is that because they're moist, because they're, inherently like fresh and moist? Or are we talking about where something spilled on them? They became moist because some moisture got on them from somewhere else. So in the end, we said that it's talking about that they're moist because of themselves. But then we said, what about, let's say, clothing, which we said that you can only insulate with when it's dry, but not when it's moist. It means the clothing that was made from wool from between the legs of the animal, where it's all sweaty and moist. Sounds very appealing to wear. Okay, next, we talked about tefillin a little bit, which was cool. And we said that in order to wear tefillin, you must have a clean body. What does that mean? So Abai says you have to make sure that you will not be passing gas in your tefillin. Rava says make sure that you are not sleeping in your tefillin. Then we had that cool story of Elisha baal Kenafayim, where they called him Elisha baal Kenafayim because of the decree of the Romans not to wear tefillin, and he defied the decree and wore tefillin in public. He got chased down by a police officer. He took his tefillin, put him in his hands. The police officer said, "What's in your hands?" And he opened his hands, and it was wings of a dove. We talked about insulating on Shabbos with hides. And then we're saying that you could then move the hides afterwards. And we want to know, can only a baal move the hides? Because he's going to use them to sit on. Or even a craftsman. Can a craftsman also move the hides? Do we say he's makbid on them because he's not going to want to touch them because he's going to sell them and therefore they're muktzah? Or do we say, no, he can also, it's not going to be muktzah for him either. So Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar says it makes sense to say that only the baal can move it, but the craftsman would not be allowed to move it because he's going to be makbid. Rav Chanina bar Chama said, he quoted Rabbi Shema Rabbi Yossi, who said that his father, Rabbi Yossi, was a tanner, was a craftsman of hides. And, his father would just say, hey, bring over one of my hides so that we could sit on it. So clearly, they're not, the baal is not makbid. The craftsman is not makbid, and therefore it shouldn't be muktzah on Shabbos. And we say at the end of the day, it's actually machlokas Tanaim. We quoted a brayso in which the Tanna Kama says that only a baal would be able to move hides on Shabbos, whereas a craftsman would not. And Rabbi Yossi said even craftsmen can move hides on Shabbos. We then got into the 39 melachos at the end, and we said, what are they based on? Rabbi Chanina bar Chama said that they're based on the 39 melachos that they did in the Mishkan. Right? There were 39 melachos in building the Mishkan. Those are the 39 melachos that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Rabbi Yonasan bar Elazar said, and he quoted Rabbi Shimon bar Yossi bar Likunya, that it's based on the times that it says melacha, melachto, and meleches in the Torah, which are 39. And Rabbi Yosef pointed out that actually it's really 40, and one of them doesn't belong and needs to be booted. And the question is it the pasuk by Yosef when it says, right, vayavo abayisa lasos melachto, or is it the pasuk that says v'amelacha haisa dayam? And in the end we said teku. We don't know which one stays and which one goes. Fine. And then at the end we brought a brayso supporting Rav Chanina bar Chama that the 39 melachos are based on the 39 melachos that they did in the Mishkan. And we said, for example, we don't plant on Shabbos because they didn't, right? Because planting was one of the things that they did for the Mishkan, etc. Cool. Well, that was Daf Mem Tes of Masechta Shabbos. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one. Peace.